is you have some choices here. Would you A, use it, B, put it in the reserves, or C, refuse it altogether? That's the $26 million for education. So you have a multiple choice, Mr. Dugard.
Well, I would accept it under the terms as we understand them now, encumber it to be spent next year, not for new spending, but to help maintain the existing spending we have and not take any more drastic cuts in the fiscal year 2012 budget than we will have to take. There's no question we're going to have to cut the budget for fiscal year 2012. This money, if we encumber it through fiscal year 2011, to be spent in 2012 will help us manage through that budget challenge we face. Many states around the country built their budgets assuming they'd get this money. South Dakota did not. South Dakota balanced its budget this year without using reserves, without raising taxes. I'm confident we can do that again next year when we build the fiscal year 2012 budget. And I think Governor Rounds had a press release yesterday in which he announced that indeed South Dakota will take this money, will encumber it this year to be spent next year. It will not mean new spending. It will simply replace a part of the deficit that we would otherwise experience when we built the fiscal year 2012 budget.
Mr. Heidebrum, again, a multiple choice on this, A, B, or C.
Well, thank you, Jerry. I'm glad to hear that the Lieutenant Governor has come around to my way of thinking. We had a debate last week that was in front of educators in South Dakota, and in fact, at that time, the Lieutenant Governor said not only would he have voted against the bill in the Congress, but that he was very concerned about it because of potential strings that were attached. I reminded him that I'd read the bill twice and there were no strings attached, and we really ought to avail ourselves of those dollars. So yesterday at 3 o'clock, the governor had a conference call and told us that in fact, there weren't any strings attached, and we are going to make use of those dollars. Now, as to this question, those are dollars earmarked for education. That's what the title is for the bill coming along with that package, and that's where it should be used. I remind you that last year, education got no increase. K through 12 got zero increase. At the same time, we were sending money to Trans-Canada Pipeline for an incentive program that they never asked for and didn't need to put a crude oil pipeline under South Dakota. So these dollars are for education. We need to make sure that they're used, invested in K through 12 education.
Okay, quick rebuttal, Mr. Dugard.
Well, I would just like to respond again to some of the remarks that were just made. If Senator Heidebrum is suggesting that we should have new spending with this money, I would be opposed to that. I also disagree with his characterization that I suggested there were strings attached that we didn't know about. When I spoke to this issue at the educators' debate, the statement I made was we should not accept this money until we understand what are the preconditions. And it was only after a conversation with the Department of Education in which all 50 states were on the line, and the conversation was recorded and stated and restated that one may encumber these funds this year and spend them next year so that we do not increase our spending and create an anticipation of further increases or maintenance of effort when the federal money goes away. It was only after that became clear that Governor Rounds decided to take the money, and those are the conditions under which I would take the money.
Okay, thank you. Next question from the audience, and again, if you have questions, be sure to write them down and hand them in. This has to do with energy potential in South Dakota. What is going to be done about transmission systems with the 5-year restrictions on leasing wind projects? When will it be done? We'll start this with Mr. Heidebrum. Scott?
Well, thank you for the question. Transmission is a major challenge when it comes to wind power development in South Dakota. There are other ways to go about it. We can look at end use of that electricity near the site of where it's produced. We can do that. I want to point out, and I think a lot of you know, that the legislature did take a couple steps forward in making sure that these leases protect the landowners. Before the last session of the legislature, landowners did not have major protection under a lot of the leases that were getting signed up around South Dakota. So the legislature changed that law, and I was very proud to be a part of that. There is money in the pending energy legislation before the Congress that would deal with transmission lines, but The indication I have is that that energy legislation has now been severely curtailed, and I'm not exactly sure where we are in terms of transmission in that federal legislation. But that truly is the challenge we face, so we need to look at different ways for end use of the electricity near the site. One of the most natural partnerships I can think of is wind power and ethanol. One of the biggest users of electricity is ethanol, frankly, the ethanol production process. And what a great way to partner. Hopefully that will be possible in the days ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Dugard, on energy potential and transmission systems.
I think in terms of wind energy, I think it's important to set the stage a little bit. When Governor Rounds and I took office, there were 3 megawatts of installed wind in South Dakota. By the end of last year, we had built that to 400 megawatts, and by the end of this year, it'll be somewhere between 600 and 700, depending upon the pace of construction. Certainly, transmission is a barrier. Other states have overcome that barrier by mandating certain percentages of the electric portfolio that's used in those states. Iowa has taken this course. Minnesota has taken this course. South Dakota has not mandated portfolio percentages, because what that does is it pushes electric generation or wind power generation into areas where they would not otherwise be economically feasible. And although the wind projects get built, the additional cost that's attributable to building them in uneconomic areas gets driven down to the ratepayers. And that's one of the reasons why electricity rates have gone up at a much higher pace in Minnesota and Iowa than in South Dakota. So in protecting the ratepayer, I think South Dakota has taken the right course. Transmission pockets are being found. As I said, we've grown now up to between 600 and 700 megawatts by the end of this year. Even in my own area, on the quarter section where Linda and I still live, we were approached by a wind developer just this month to sign a lease agreement to possibly install a wind farm in that area. So I know what's going on. My neighbors are signing up. My friends around the state are signing up. If we can get the transmission nut cracked, I think that will mean a lot to South Dakota. The real answer, though, is interstate transmission corridors. The Green Energy Corridor is one such project that would cut through the patchwork of PUC-controlled state regulation and get a national corridor to those places where power is needed and used, like Minneapolis and Chicago and points east. So I do think that the best solution is a bully pulpit solution. And the last thing I want to mention is that the governor did initiate property tax reform to allow transmission lines to be treated the same way as wind property, so as to encourage the installation and building of transmission lines. And that was passed by the legislature a couple of years ago, and I think has been helpful in encouraging wind farms.
Quick rebuttal.
Just a couple quick points. First of all, electricity rates in South Dakota have gone up as well. And it's interesting to compare the two. I don't think anyone here doesn't understand that in terms of your own utility bills. Second of all, what has happened in Iowa and Minnesota is that they have a renewable energy standard. That renewable energy standard has required large power companies to get into the wind business. That's why when you go over to Minnesota or down through Iowa, you see such a thick concentration of wind energy. South Dakota has not seen fit to do that, and as a result, we are well behind both Iowa and Minnesota in terms of the development of wind.
Okay. All right. Yeah, quick rebuttal.
Again, if Senator Heitman is suggesting that we should mandate the portfolio standard, I'd like to hear that. And of course, electricity has gone up in South Dakota. The point I made is it has not gone up as fast as in Iowa and Minnesota. And part of the reason the increase is outpacing South Dakota is because of the renewable portfolio standard.
Okay, thank you. We'll continue to move on here. Questions on the stimulus money. We'll combine a couple here that are similar. Since the stimulus money bailed the state out the past couple of years, what will you do without it to balance the budget next year, combined with if the state can continue to get by without tax and fee increases? So stimulus money, how do we balance the budget next year without it and without tax and fee increases? Mr. Heidebrum. Go ahead. Go
go? Okay, great.